Welcome, Wargamers, to the awfully crowded forests of Ea, because today we are talking about the Exile campaign, Part 3, as it features in the Bellum book Chronicles and Legends, covering this rich moment in history of the Conquest setting that has some real setup for the game's current lore. And we've talked about a whole bunch of it. Go watch the first of this video series and catch up if you want to understand what's going on. But the big surprise from the last video were that the mankind that exists here, the Dominion collectively, and the Spire, received a very clear and public lesson. Dweghom marching to war is scary, and no one had ever seen anything quite like it before, and some of the leaders will absorb the lessons of what they saw that day very quickly, and others are going to pay the price for it. And so today we're going to pick up right where we left off, talking about the Exile campaign narrative, immediately after the Battles of 3, which was in our last video. Now, one thing I'd like to add up top here, if you're interested in any Bellum stuff or any hobby supplies, please consider using one of the Linktree links from my description down below. The Bellum link is in there. Anytime you use one of those, you'll see exactly how much money you'll save, and each time you do, it throws a tip in my tip jar that goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I'm so thankful for each and every one of you. It keeps things ad-free, which just makes for an all-around better listening experience. And I also want to throw a shout out to Goonhammer, which is an awesome blog and player resource online. They just have a Conquest community that's just picking up and starting to have, tactical tips and get started stuff for new players. So go check out Goonhammer. Now, I mentioned at the top that the lessons taught by seeing the Dweghom in action were received in a few different ways. The previous general of the Dominion army thought that we could use them, or perhaps even be allies, and he was quickly corrected of this notion at the hands of a mighty axe. His replacement, Abundant Gurgis, is a bit more savvy. Instead of just trying to yeet this religious zeal of an empire into their enemies, he pauses. He pulls the Dominion army back to the nearest town, and he begins to consolidate, while his scouts do a ton of the work right now. Gurgis is what I'm going to call him. He's conscripting and training people as fast as he can. He lost a lot of his veterans in the Battles of 3, and he's trying to scrape together anything he can get past the rebels that are behind him. All the while, his scouts are out there, documenting things furiously, trying to understand the chapter that's unfolding before them. For starters, it looks like, at first glance, that everything has slowed down to a crawl. Right, this whole thing started with great knockdown, drag-out fights between major powers. We had a whole Dweghom march out there, we had a whole Dominion religious crusade, the Spire army, but then there's this cooling period, at least, like I said, to the naked eye. The main Spire army of Abhorreth made it back to their base, where they are also concentrating their forces. But the Dweghom armies have largely been silent. They didn't just keep going and then attack Abhorreth, they kind of went dark for a little while. And people are like, well, where did they go, right? Just moments ago, it seemed like a metal avalanche headed directly towards them, and now they're just kind of gone? And the answer is, the Dweghom are busy doing some spring cleaning. And while this was the fight against major powers, which was the goal of the Dweghom marches all along, the Regs all had secondary goals. A common one being that they wanted to push away all the Weaver courts that had gone to claim some of their land. They come up from their Dweghom Holds, they're like, what are all these wood elves doing in our trees? Get them out of there. And they start shaking them out, and that's basically what this section of the campaign is for them. While the humans in the Spire are recovering and planning, there's an entire silent war going on between small enclaves of Weaver courts, like I said before, think the wood elf version of the Spire, and Dweghom detachments. So it's not that this army that was so great disbanded or went silent. The Dweghom are consolidating the boundaries of their empire, while the other combatants in this are still trying to consolidate singular armies. But what that means is this whole affair begins to calcify into a new dynamic. New boundaries and army lines are being drawn up as we begin to understand the Dweghom boundaries, like what land they claim as their own. Where can we no longer go safely? And these boundaries and army lines are being drawn up right as the campaign enters its second stage. Now, interestingly, the next big moment in our timeline here is the events that happened far, far away from where this Dominion leader is trying to concentrate his forces. Near a city called Invicta. It's also owned by the Dominion. And so if we were to pull our camera view up into the sky and kind of go further northward, we'll settle on the Dominion city of Invicta, where they're having their own troubles. Recently, the Dominion leaders were usurped by a band of rebels of their own, a different set than the ones that are harassing Gurgis. And this now free Dominion city sits right near the other spire that the Dweghom wanted to kill. Remember, there was two. There was Spire Abhorreth, and there was Spire Testindus. Invictus is right by Testindus. Well, the leader of that first Dweghom army, Ragnar, took his forces way north. Yes, they hit the Spire army of Abhorreth, but they basically decided to ping-pong off of it and head north, and it's revealed that his destination is the next Spire, Testindus, for a very cool reason. Now, remember in my last video when I mentioned this particular Ragnar, he kept punching Weaver armies, but specifically pushing them in the way of his neighbor to slow them down, the other Dweghom clan next to them. So after slowing down his neighbor, he then went and gave Spire Abhorreth a bloody nose, got it all roused and angry in the battles of 3, and then he decided to duck out and attack a totally different spire. And the idea here is he's trying to sabotage the other Dweghom hold, a hold known as Gable Dome, led by Rag Aceros. We're going to slow him down with enemies, and then he'll be so agitated when he hears the news that Ragnar is about to topple the first spire that he's going to overstretch himself and walk right up to the nearest one, Spire Abhorreth, which is now primed and ready for them, because they've already got the bee's nest stirred by the last Dweghom army, which I think is a great idea. This all seems like minutia until you step back and be like, this guy is awesome. He just rattled the bee's nest and then just kept moving to let everybody else deal with what's going on in Abhorreth. However, his competitor, Rag Aceros, doesn't take the bait. Instead, he looks at what's going on, and he's not really upset about being, distracted by the Weaver courts. He likes gaining glory. He's like, yeah, I'll go slower, but I'm still gonna fight. I'm not gonna run away from anything. I'm gonna earn as much glory as you do. But he doesn't take the bait to go straight to Spire Abhorreth. Instead, he's like, actually, we're gonna race our way up to Testindus. He's not necessarily gonna beat the other hold there, but the idea is, I'm not going to let him get all that glory and Ogham from that battle without at least trying to be a part of it. And then maybe we can work together to fight Spire Abhorreth, but at that point it doesn't really matter. I'm just not going to let you get, first of all, the glory of being first, and then potentially the only one to defeat a Spire. However, from where these armies launch in the current snapshot, if we're doing an aerial view of everything, they both have human settlements in their way. And while the Dweghom don't fear humans, they don't want to get cut off, surrounded, or distracted by them either. And so independently, these two Dweghom armies go after the human settlements on their way to Spire Testindus. And I think this piece here really exists for us as players to put our armies into the story. Right, one of the human towns is where our buddy Gurgis is, and while he does man a defense that takes out 2 drakes, which ultimately make the Dweghom army fall back, his forces are functionally destroyed. In fact, he loses half the walls of the city, most of his army, and the Old Dominion itself decrees that he is to be court-martialed and killed because of his failure, even though he succeeded in saving the town. So that's where Gurgis kind of drops out of our story. He was there, but he got rolled over real hard by a bunch of Dweghom. Ultimately, he did cause enough stuff for them to have to push back, because their ultimate goal is the Spire, but they were functionally knocked out of the battle here. The other city, Invictus, as we said, recently fell to the hands of Dominion rebels. And while the Dweghom respect this leader, I think her name is Hoatia, a lot more than the others, he still doesn't want to deal with her. So the army starts moving towards the city, and right before he's about to attack it, Rig Gishridib gets some news. The third Dweghom march, who we have not talked about at all yet. The Dweghom clan, known as Endure, is led by Steel Shaper Ishta, and they are moving at double time right towards Spire Testindus. So what started as a war has now become a race between all these various Dweghom clans. We'll talk about Ishta here in a second, but upon hearing this news that now he has two competitors headed for the same thing he looks at this town and is like, I mean, honestly, how much trouble could they really cause me? Forget this. And so they just forget about it. Gishredib leaves his forces. They start heading along a huge river valleyway that separates the lands of the Dominion from the lands of the Spire, and ends his journey at a bridge that's going to take him across the river into Testindus land. At the same time that he arrives at that bridge, the second Hold march arrives, led by Acetos, right, the other Rag. And this is where we get to see the Dweghom leadership break down in a way that no other army does. And the question is simple, okay? They have these two forces and one bridge. Who gets to cross first? And the answer is very simple. The person or side that has the most Ogham. And Ogham in Dweghom just means it's like their currency for glory and honor. So these two full Dweghom armies, the likes of which has never been seen on the surface of the planet, stop right outside of their destination for almost 2 weeks to debate over who's cooler. The two forces try to basically move across together after a lot of, we'll say, diplomacy of trying to figure this all out, which results in fights breaking out between the armies. Nothing that was ordered by their leaders, but brawls. You have two forces that are forced to be in close proximity that do not like each other. Things are falling apart. It's kind of getting really ragged. And as both armies are making their way across this waterway, they never really stop to wonder a very important question. Why is there only one bridge? And the answer is because the leader of the rebels that Gishredib ignored blew them all up. Hoatia forced the Dweghom armies to this spot, not necessarily intending for them to meet up at the same time and argue, but that was a bonus. But she wanted a Dweghom army of massive size and incalculable scale that she knew was coming to be on this bridge. Because as the best elements of these two combined Dweghom armies are crossing the bridge, thinking, Drakes, support heroes, maybe supplies, weapons, that kind of thing, she blows the bridge. This sends huge chunks of irreplaceable Dweghom units, supplies, weapons into the river, and just knocks the legs out from underneath a lot of the fighting power that these forces have. And not only does it do that, but because all the other bridges are gone, this, hopefully to her, effectively seals off whatever is happening in Spire Testindus away from her people. Right? She made it so that you have to cross here, and then once they do, you hopefully, again, just like the Dominion was hoping to do with, the rebels were hoping to do with Massilius, right? Just leave you out to the wolves, and just, hopefully, it'll just take care of itself. It's kind of the game plan here. Now, the two Dweghom armies that do make it across the river find that the Spire is already under siege by that third Hold. Remember we said Hold Endure was led by Steel Shaper Ishta instead of a Rake. This means they have a sort of an arcane focused and more, I guess, refined, you might say. She's definitely more chill leader with a cooler head here in charge of the siege. Now, since she got there first and started the siege, she is de facto in charge of the entire thing. That's just how their system works. There's not a whole lot of question about it. And it's here that we now have 3 entire Dweghom armies, a formidable, faction in their own right each, sitting at the base of Spire Testindus, ready for the attack, while the exiles within the Spire are looking down at all this and are absolutely mortified. Now I want to pause here, and we're going to get into the epic battle of Testindus as it goes on in our next video. But I want to talk about why this section is really cool. Well, first of all, like I mentioned in all these videos, faction interplay is so important. We get a sense here of how a Steel Shaper-led Dweghom army is fundamentally different from the ones led by Rags. Regs are about the military arm of the faction, and everything, to a lesser extent with all Dweghom, is measured in Augum, how much glory you attain or something like that. But what's interesting is when you have leaders who are more arcane focused, where it took a mental discipline or perhaps a discipline of will or character to achieve what they have rather than just physical might, you get a different kind of army. Ishta is described as somewhat chill by Dweghom standards, meaning she'll still cut your throat and murder you on a 10 ways till Sunday, but she'll be very calm and collected about it. She's a planner and a thinker, and so her debut into this battle seemed very abrupt. She was just like, and now she's here, and she beat everybody else there. And you're like, well, then where the heck was she? I get that, but also at the same time, it's highlighting for us how their interpersonal system works. She got there first, which means she gets to claim this. The other two dinguses spent 2 weeks debating about who's more glorious. You can see how the different, interpolitics of Dweghom society are starting to kind of make things fall apart in sort of a rough way. And we're going to wrap this whole story up in my next video, which I'm so excited to get into. I cannot wait to chat with you tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Happy wargaming, my friends.